Thanks, everybody. You know, I always get surprised by how bright the lights are. It's because I got fired from my last TV show a long time ago, so I don't remember. This is such a great crowd, and I want to thank all of you for coming and supporting the Indy and making this our best attended event ever. Just to do some housekeeping stuff before I bring up the guy that you came to the guy that you came to see tonight. Please silence your phones. I shouldn't have to tell anybody that. You can keep on silent because we want you, if you want to, there is a hashtag for this event. If you want to tweet about it, the hashtag is hashtag IndyTalks. We kept it simple. We host these conversations in order to shine light on important policy issues and hold elected officials accountable on your behalf. We call that the Indy way. If you weren't aware, we're Nevada's only statewide nonprofit news team and the only newsroom in the state that's growing. I'm very proud of that. As Elizabeth said, we started with a scrappy band of 6, and we've quadrupled in size since we started 6 years ago, and I could not be prouder of this team. We survive on donations and memberships, so if you actually had the temerity to come to this without supporting us, please support us. I want to give a huge thank you to Station Casinos for being our event host. They have been amazing. We especially appreciate Michael Britt, and he actually did a couple of things for me before this that I don't want to talk about, but he helped me out. I needed some help. Thank. Best single malt scotch I've had in a long time. You have a great team too, and I really appreciate it. And they've been great hosts and supported this event. You saw that they were our main sponsor of this event. I want to thank our other major event sponsors. I'll just list some of them: Carrera Nevada, Optum Care, Southwest Gas, Core Construction, Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. No boy. HCA Healthcare, NV Energy Foundation, Nevada State Bank, Pharma, and, of course, the Las Vegas Chamber, who endorsed the governor, I believe, in the election. Thanks to them and all of our sponsors tonight. And as the governor said in his State of the State, please clap. Thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't take the time to thank the Indy's amazing revenue team, Brett Burke, Katie Foley, and Megan Riley, for all their hard work putting this event together. Some of you in this crowd have experience putting together events. It's not an easy feat, and to get a crowd this size tonight, I just couldn't be prouder of them. I also want to thank Kristen, who has been doing the social media for the Indy for quite some time. Kristen Leonard, the way that she promoted this event is part of the reason that you were here. I want to thank her. And of course, I could not thank Stephanie Lauer, who is our Director of Operations, who you may have seen out there when you checked. And she's as hard-working a person as I've ever had the pleasure to work with, and she truly is the glue that keeps the Indy together. So give her a round of applause, please. Finally, tonight, before we start this conversation with the governor, I want to say that one of the things that I'm proudest of with the Indy is that we have encouraged and I think been a facilitator for civil discourse, which is sorely lacking these days in government and politics. So I want to say this, and I shouldn't have to say this, but this is the times that we live in. No heckling, no disruptions. This is not a 3 strikes and you're out. This is a 1 strike and you're out. And trust me, there's security around here that you may or may not see, but you will be introduced to them very, very quickly. So please be civil. And no booing or anything like that. You can clap for me if you want, but not the governor. And now I want to welcome the man of the hour, Governor Joe Lombardo.
John, how are you?
Good.
Nice crowd.
Standing ovation like that, they're going to want an encore, Governor, you know.
Well, before we get started.
Wait a second. You're starting?
No.
Okay, all right.
I was standing out in the hallway listening to John talk about himself. And he says, in the words of the governor, can you please clap? That's not what I said. I said, that's worthy of a clap.
Already misquoting you so early in your tenure. I do want to say, and I think everyone here realizes this, the governor just gave his state of the state. He did not have to say, yeah, I'll agree to sit down with John Ralston for 90 minutes. And there was no hesitation by him or his team. And I want to say I really appreciate it.
No. I'm going to correct that one too. So there was some hesitation when he said 90 minutes. But I'm here.
You are, and we appreciate it. And listen, I'm going to try to get to as many topics as I can. We're just going to have a conversation about policy, and maybe I'll save a couple of political questions for the end that you'll enjoy. But I'm sure some people are going to be disappointed that we don't cover everything, Governor. So I really do appreciate you agreeing to do one of these every week of the legislature. So thank you for that. So.
Best policy is don't say anything.
Any regrets yet?
No, absolutely not. It's interesting. The last time you and I met, you asked me that, early on in the process, and when I made the decision to run for governor, and no, absolutely not. Obviously I'm happy because I won, but even if I didn't win, there would have been no regrets in the process. There would have been regrets that I didn't do it. And I'm happy as the results, obviously, and I'm looking forward to what we can do here in the state and affecting change and all the reasons why I ran. So.
I hope they don't do that after everything you say, but it's very possible.
I hope they do.
I think just make sure you look and see who's clapping the loudest. You can remember that.
I'll look and see who's not clapping.
That's right. He already gets the job. I mean, you haven't been doing this that long, but I'm just wondering, Governor, have you been surprised by anything yet? I mean, here you are. You came from you're a career in law enforcement. And suddenly you're in this alien world of the legislature in Carson City and learning about the process. Anything surprised you so far?
Yeah, I mean, during the process, how extreme the partisanship was, that surprised me. But post-process, in my opinion, a good idea is a good idea, no matter who it comes from, no matter who says it. And see, they're doing it.
Yeah, this is what you did. You said to the crowd, I got to sit up here for 90 minutes. Clap as much as you can so we cut down the time.
But but to build off that, a good idea is no matter who it comes from, and the reference of that, and I noticed you said something to this effect in one of your tweets was post the State of the State. I believe I created an environment for everybody in that room to experience some success. And it was unfortunate to see some people that didn't support, in totality, some of the things I said. So that really surprised me. So.
What do you mean? Because all you did was hand out candy that night, right? So you have everybody.
Well, that's what I thought I was doing, but there were still people sitting on their hands, and that's what I was talking about. No matter if it's a good idea, no matter who's saying it, whether there's politics involved or not, you got to come to terms with it and show some maturity and say, hey, all right, this is what it's about, moving us forward.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it's one of the things I wanted to ask you about early in this, Governor. I mean, everyone knows what the setup is. There's two Democratic houses. They have a supermajority in one house and a sizable lead in the other. And here we have a Republican governor. I mean, the cynics in this room, not that I'm one of them, would say, you know, this is going to be gridlock. Nothing's going to get done, as opposed to what you said. If it's a good idea, we should all embrace it. There shouldn't be partisanship. So I'm wondering what you think your responsibility is to make sure that that's not what the session is.
Right,
Are you going to meet with the Democratic leaders? Have you met with them? Are you going to do it regularly? Tell us about that.
Well, let's back up a little bit and I'll answer your question. So a big part of this is actually approval of my budget, right? And the general fund budget, and hopefully they see some benefit to that. And then the second part of this is the legislative process, you know, laws coming forward to the benefit or the detriment of Nevadans, and you have to make a decision which one you'll support and which one you won't. And you mentioned it, you know, the situation I've been put in as a result of the legislative process or the majority on the Democratic Party versus a Republican governor. And what I've learned, and you mentioned it too, you know, I was the sheriff for some time, I was law enforcement for a long period of time, a majority of my life. And all that success and that consternation and crisis and response and policy and everything else that goes with running a business is communication. The rise and fall of any organization is either the robust communication or lack of communication. And I come to terms with that, knowing I'm going to have to communicate so we're not caught in gridlock per se. There's some people that would appreciate gridlock. Hey, you know, let's just get through the session and do no harm and move forward, and hopefully we change the election paradigm in the next session. But I don't see that. I don't want to waste anybody's time, and it's important that we act sooner than later. So yeah, I plan on meeting with them. I've already met with them more than once, the leadership. And then hopefully it'll be on a regular basis moving forward. And I asked Brian Sandoval what his plan was, because at 3 out of 4 of his legislative session, he had a minority. And he said it was just regular meetings on a regular defined schedule and talk about the issues.
You think you're as charming as Brian Sandoval, though?
Brian Sandoval's never been a police officer. So it's in debate. I would ask my wife if I'm better looking. Where is my wife? Oh, there she is.
Yeah. Well, if she doesn't agree with that, you got a problem. So let's talk about, you've had these initial meetings. You saw Speaker Yeager's response to your State of the State, probably.
No, I didn't see it, but I was told about it.
Okay. But so where do you see common ground with the Democrats in the legislature? I think they should take at face value, I should, everyone in this room should, that you're committed to that. Where's the common ground?
Well, you know, I pride myself of being a little bit of a wonk and talk about data and science, and I think a lot of it, if you're faced with the facts, it's hard for you to deny it. And if we present facts, let's use criminal justice reform as an example. And I saw that he said that his ideas or his bill AB 236 is working, and I have to flat disagree. Because if you put it in proximity of when it was passed to the data that's provided from that point to this point, it's going in the wrong direction. So hopefully there's some sense of understanding on that. And I know he used the words dead on arrival, and hopefully that's just political theater. And you know, we get through the session and there's discussion to be taking place, and your constituents, you're concerned for your constituents, and base your decisions on reality versus personal emotion, and we'll get past that.
Well, you're already making me go out of order in the topics, but you brought it up, and let's talk about it, because this is definitely where you're going to be a little bit at loggerheads with the Democratic legislature.
Right.
They passed this what they call criminal justice reform, and you think you're going to be able to persuade them through the use of data that you are right and they are wrong in this? I mean, you essentially think that bill made this state less safe, don't you?
I do, absolutely do. I believe that, and I've said it more than once.
And Governor, I don't know about a crowd clapping for the state being less safe, but we can talk about that later. This is your area of expertise,
Yeah.
though. So rather than using anecdotes, rather than just saying this happened and so I know it's less safe, make the case that this state is less safe and that some of these things need to be repealed or changed.
Sure. I mean, we've had a significant increase in the homicide rate, significant increase in violent crime across the board, significant increase in property crimes across the board. And if you look at AB 236 and the definition of repeat offenders and the recidivism that is defined in AB 236 and the sentences and the penalties that go along with committing crime, repeat offenders, it's all going in the wrong direction. So I had experience in my first 6 years as the sheriff, a decrease in crime across the board, to the tune 30+%, okay? And then AB 236 comes along, you see what other people are doing in other legislatures, across the board in the United States, and you say, well, that sounds like a good idea, and this is what we're thinking, in criminal justice reform. Outside of what police do on their daily basis and how they conduct their business and how they use force in doing what they do, you have to look at the data. And a lot of times what I've noticed in my testimony up at the legislatures in years past, there's a lot of anecdotal stories. You use that word, anecdotal stories that come forward to justify their position. And a lot of times it's not apples and apples. It's not the same size population that we're dealing with. It's a different size jurisdictions, a different demographic, different social structure. And you can't use those, but quite often it is sold upon those. Now, when you look at about HB 236 and we're talking about crime data, the proof is in the pudding. We have a increase in crime substantially. You have a single-digit increase in crime and violent crime. You have a double-digit increase in property crimes, and that is exactly in close proximity of the passing of AB 236. I'm doing legislative testimony as we speak, and you can't deny that. You can't deny that, and it's important for people to realize that.
But this is the time of year right before the session begins, and the governor gives the state of the state when everyone's talking about bipartisanship. We're going to try to get along, and unfortunately, my experience and a lot of people in this room experience says, okay, that's nice. Those are words. It's going to degenerate. You don't want to hear words like this is dead on arrival or non-starter.
No, absolutely
not. But it goes both ways, though, right, Governor?
Right.
I mean, you have to be open to some of these proposals as well, don't you?
Yeah, look at AB 236. I said it right on the record in the state of the state. I didn't agree with some of it, in the spirit of partisanship, and we did finally become to a consensus. It wasn't in this draconian form that it was originally presented, and that's part of the process, right? Back and forth. And then we eventually got there, and I think it was important for the police reform that was included that it moved forward in the spirit of partisanship and moving forward. I didn't oppose it at the end. But we didn't have 2.5 years of data to draw from since then. So
I want to talk about a couple other public safety issues before we move back to my order.
You want to talk about the bills?
No. This is a very bad subject for you.
So, whenever I got a little advice before I came up here tonight. Anytime John tries to lead the show, that just mention the Buffalo Bills.
My first advice to you is to fire Ryan Irwin. Because that's just going to increase the number of Trump questions I'm going to ask you. I'm kidding. So,
I'm not afraid of you.
I know you're not. And I really want to have a serious discussion with you about some of these issues. So
sure.
Let's get back to it. One of the things that I was, as a longtime observer of governors and states, I was impressed about, and I think you are informed by your law enforcement experience in this area, and I want you to talk about it a little bit more than you did in the state of the state, is you really made a commitment to something that is sloughed off by almost every legislature and governor, and that's mental health. And mental health services in this state generally are woeful. There are a lot of people trying to do a good job, but they don't have the resources, Governor. Often the private sector has to pick up where the public sector falls down. It sounded to me in your speech that you really believe that the investing in mental health is something that is going to happen this time.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Absolutely, and you're correct, but I want to back up a little bit further, and I'll inject it into my law enforcement experience. But I had the state of the Clark County School District this morning. I went to that, attended, and wanted to see what the superintendent had to say in the education space. And I had the opportunity, I had the pleasure of talking with Jan Jones before we walked in. And we were talking about education in totality, and she said, she brought up a very poignant piece of information to me. She said she was managing me by wandering around and talking to some superintendents here shortly. And they said, what is the biggest issue? Is it the teacher pay? Is it the size of the classrooms? Is it all the other things that we keep talking about in the education space? And unanimously, they all said it's mental health. It's mental health. So that's the Gladiator Academy, right? So you start at the beginning here, and you progress through the process, and then you get into homelessness, and then you get into criminal acts associated with mental health and everything else that goes along with the mental health. And it just continually progresses, right? And we're seeing it proliferate across the United States. It's not unique to Nevada. It's not unique to Las Vegas. It's proliferating everywhere. And why is that? You know, Ronald Reagan, under his term, he made some budgetary decisions, and we got rid of some of a majority of our mental health services that was federally subsidized during that period. And we had a significant control in that, but it was more of an incarceration model. And then subsequently we had, they left it to the states to take care of it, and it's a big draw on your budget in the state and the county budgets. And you alluded to it. What is the answer to the problem? Well, everybody tries it, right? One is they think incarceration is the answer to the problem. We know that's not true. Then they think it's affordable housing and housing for the problem. We know that's not the problem, because 80+%, if you gave them a place, they won't go stay in it. Okay? And then the pieces on it is counseling, but what I have seen in my career in law enforcement is not necessarily long-term, but a medium term of bed space. It's the ability to put somebody in a safe space, an ability to have a complete medical evaluation, and more than a 3-day supply of psychotropic SSR drugs to get your mind right. And we don't have that.
It's expensive as hell to do that.
It's expensive as hell, but you have to look at the quality of life for everybody in this room. When they leave their house in Summerlin or wherever it may be, and you drive out and you see a person experience, and they're troubled mentally or their financial situation, and as a result they're homeless. It's expensive. You have to deal with that, and you see it proliferating. And when I was growing up, nobody ever saw a homeless person in Summerlin, but now it's the society we live in now, and we have to get used to it, and we have to come up with solutions for it. And beds are the solution, both in the short term and the long term. So if you so what you want to do in government policy and public policy is, you don't want to be the beta agency, right? You don't want to waste money, and you don't want to waste people's time on failed programs. So what we did in law enforcement, and in partnership with city and county governments across the board in Clark County, we made a trip out to San Antonio because everybody said that was best practice. And you had the answer in the beginning of the question, was it's a public-private partnership because of the expense and the resources, right? And so they have I can't remember the nomenclature they use for the name of it. It's some sort of safe village nomenclature, and you have that medium-term sequestration of an individual to hopefully get them the services they need.
Well, if you can't find common ground on that with the legislature, there's really something wrong in this. So you got a Republican governor who is uniquely, in my opinion, positioned because of your experience in law enforcement and seeing the need for this. If you can't find common cause with them on this, you're not going to find anything.
Right, and just to give your audience a sense of numbers, so the Clark County Detention Center, which is the largest detention facility in Clark County, at any point in time, 30 to 35% of the people incarcerated there are on some form of psychotropic drugs, okay? Because what happens in the police world, in public protection, if you're dealing with some social issue, what is the answer to your issue? Dial 911, right? And the police officer shows up, he's only got limited number of tools in his tool bag, and usually the default, because of the lack of beds over here, the lack of providers to evaluate that individual, if there is a bed, is incarceration, right? So you pay for it, and we all suffer because of the process. It's a very complex situation that doesn't have an answer in the short order. But let me build on this. There's something else people need to realize. So if you, Christina Mandeville, you're out here. She's very well versed in this issue. And so if you're arrested and you go through the system, and the judge wants a competency hearing because your defense counsel says, hey, this person needs better service or different service than traditional incarceration, even before trial starts. Because of our makeup and lack of resources here in the state of Nevada, you're ordered to go to a competency hearing, and we have to put you on a plane in Southern Nevada because there's no resources in Southern Nevada, and you got to go to Reno. You got to go to Lakes Crossing.
Right.
And you got to get evaluated to your competency, and you have to stay until you are, your competency level is at a level where you can defend yourself or your counsel could defend you. And that's a flawed system. That's a flawed system. And currently the state, unfortunately, and I'm embarrassed by it, we're in the penalty phase of that because you have to make a decision in a certain amount of time, and we don't even have the ability or the resources to put you on a plane to get you up there. A lot of people don't know this,
yep.
Right? And it's frustrating, and the question is, do something about it. But everything is based off education.
We're going to get to that.
Yeah. Not that kind of education, education of the process.
Governor, here's how I know you are really, sincerely, from the heart, passionate about this. That's the most I've ever heard you talk about anything. So I want to ask you one other public safety question before we talk about some other things. And it's something that you didn't talk about at all in your State of the State, and Speaker Yeager mentioned this in his response, and that is the topic of gun violence. There have already been mass shootings since you've become governor. Governor, you and I talked to each other a few times during the mass shooting here, the worst in history. That was an incredibly harrowing experience for you. I know I'm sure it's seared into your memory, into your soul. You'll never forget it. Do you believe, I know it's tough for a Republican to talk about this, but do you believe there's no laws that can be passed that could help with this?
No, I don't believe that. I believe that we go back to the response that we had earlier in the discussion about anecdotal stories, right? And if you pass laws, only the crooks will have guns, and there's a lot of passion on both sides of this issue. But what quite often gets lost in the rhetoric or the discussion of it is there is robust laws on the books. There's existing robust laws on the books. And so, when you talk about criminal justice, it's a three-pronged issue, right? You got the police and the prosecution and defense and incarceration, and quite often the gun discussion gets lost in the prosecution piece. And we have very robust laws on the books that have an influence on gun violence and the ability to control the gun culture. And what we have to do is stand to the plate and call upon our prosecutors to prosecute individuals with those type of crimes.
But this is, with all due respect, hang on. With all due respect, this is what is always said in response to this, and I want to play devil's advocate. You just got to enforce the laws that already exist. You just got to prosecute. They're anecdotal, but there are too many of these anecdotes, Governor. There's too many of these happening. So I think what those who support gun control laws would say is, let's at least do the minimum.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so is there something that you think you could agree with the Democratic legislature on gun violence?
Well, you know, you don't want to opine on what ifs your whole life, but I'd be interested in what would come forward in that space, because, you know, when you talk about, you know, quite often you're talking about assault weapons, you know, and then you get in an argument, what is the description of an assault weapon, right? And then what can be modified in the home environment to make it an assault weapon, and what we have done. And, you know, and basically part of it is part of the Constitution. What we have done in the United States is the proverbial horse has gotten out of the barn, and it's got way down past the pasture before you can control it. We have more guns in the United States than anywhere in the world. And people need to realize that. So how do you fix that? Even if you put gun control measures in now, you're not going to have an effect on what's existing.
So you just give up?
No, you don't give up. You keep coming up with sound ideas that where you can have a consensus, and then you continue to have the conversation. But when we talk about anecdotal, you said you can come up with anecdotal stories ad nauseum, but here, look at daily gun crime. It far outweighs what they describe as a mass shooting, you know, 2 or more people
right.
During a single incident. And it's a daily issue that we deal with on a daily basis, and use in violent crime and homicides and assault. And so when I say let's enforce the crimes that are on the books, that would have a bigger influence than the rest of it.
So let's talk about 2 things you've already done as governor. You came up with these orders on regulations and no more working from home. I want to talk about that. And one thing we did, Governor, before this event is we asked our readers to come up with some questions for you as well.
Sure.
And so I want to read you what Robert Crook from Fernley wanted to know about the order on regulation. How would you defend potential criticism that your order for state agencies to identify a certain number of, quote, unnecessary regulations is 1, arbitrary, 2, just a giveaway to your campaign donors who of course don't want to be regulated, and 3, potentially harmful to Nevadans while being great for businesses profiteering? Just a simple 3-part question. Thank you, Mr. Crook from Fernley.
I'm a little bit confused on the second part.
Well,
Can you explain that better?
The second one would be, I think the implication is that you're supported by all these big businesses who don't want regulations, and even small businesses don't want regulations, so this is a gift to them. You can operate more unfettered than before because Joe Lombardo's taken away the regulations.
Well, I would say things change over time, right? And I'm going to talk about your statement you said about arbitrary 10 regulations, right? You mentioned about that, and I don't know what you said, the rabbit out of the hat with that number. I don't know, something to that effect.
Are you saying I said that, or
yeah,
Mr.
No, I'm saying you said that. And
do you remember everything I've said about you?
I do.
Oh, damn it!
You got to know your enemy, right?
You don't think of me as the enemy.
No, but you got to keep your enemies close. So let's talk about that.
I think 3 feet's about right.
So during the campaign trail, and granted, that's the political process. You have campaign donors. You know, if it was somebody else sitting up here, it's the same rhetoric that's quite often brought up to whoever's sitting here and being asked the question. Your campaign donors. Well, that's part of the process, folks. Unfortunately, if I had my way, we'd have some significant election reforms, and you could have a cap on how much money you could raise, and it'd be more based on your resume than how much money you could raise. But so 10, let's talk about the number 10 that was provided. So anybody within a bureaucratic office can take a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, and you have your book of regulations, you're going to be able to pick 1 or 2 off the top without even trying. But what I'm asking you to do is make an effort, and that's why we went to 10. Make an effort. You may not get there. And we created an environment with those executive orders on the backside that people aren't aware. Justify. as part of it, if you don't agree, justify as to the reasons why. And a lot of thing in bureaucracy and government work is everything, it gets outdated over time. And you have some of these archaic regulations that are prohibiting businesses from moving forward sooner than later, or it's cumbersome in their bottom line, no matter what it would be, and it's no longer a benefit to the public interest or safety. We got to get rid of them.
But
it just slows down the process.
Is it your intuition that tells you that, or do you know of some of these regulations? Because it does, I'll use the word, I'll play devil's advocate. It does seem arbitrary to just come up with 10. And a lot of these regulations, Governor, are implemented because they implement laws that were passed by the legislature.
Right.
A lot of them don't become laws, they have no force until regulations are passed. So, I don't want to belabor this, but maybe that was just you, and this is going to become the cliche for you, saying to everybody, there's a new sheriff in town, I'm a Republican, and I'm going to show you that I'm a Republican by doing something like this.
No, you know what, that would be unfortunate if I did do that, because, there's people involved in the process, right? And there's livelihoods involved in the process, and there's common sense involved in the process. I believe, and I'm not doing it from a position of ignorance, because as part of the responsibility in law enforcement is licensing, right? And investigation of licensures and all the steps that you have to go through. And just in that objective look at that process and that long, laborious process, I could see a lot of regulations that were unnecessary because of time, or because they were ill thought out and they didn't rise to the level of law yet. That you can do something with it. It's just a matter of process. It's a matter of business. And if you look at the private sector versus government sector, we tend to get bogged down and forget what we're there for. We're there for service. We're not there to make your life harder. And we're there for the protection. Thank you. And we're there for the protection of the public, and with the right intent.
Some of the regulations protect the public, don't
they? They do.
Right?
I'm not asking you to get rid of those. I'm asking you to get the ones that are antiquated and overburdensome, that don't have any positive result.
Can you
just let me bring it home. And there's a lot of people here. I'm sure you may have a business that is involved in permitting. I'm going to use construction industry as an example. We're caught up in the throes of inflation, and you got to get a bid document every time you have a project, and you have to do it every 3 months because you can't rely on the processing because of the logistics chain, right? But on top of that, it's taken you 18 months to pull your permit, right? And the pricing on that's changed, your situation changed, and your business model changes because of overburdensome regulations that are antiquated, and we have to fix that.
So. Can you promise here tonight that this isn't just rhetoric, that 6 months from now, when we do this again, that you're going to be able to give a list of regulations, antiquated regulations that you got rid of? You're going to do something.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And when I mentioned it, and I'll say it again, 10 is an arbitrary number, but 10 requires effort. And what I said is, in the template, in the foundational document that we're asking each department to fill out, is if you don't believe you can get to 10, and here's the reasons why, we ask that.
So let's talk about the other order on, this is part of what you essentially said, getting rid of some of the COVID-era regulations, where people were working remotely. State workers now have to come and work out of their offices. And to me, it seems like there could be an argument made, Governor, that you don't understand how the world has changed since the pandemic. A lot of private businesses have now accepted that some of their employees are going to work remotely, and in some ways it can be more efficient. If you're not a public-facing person in state government, for instance, why shouldn't you still work at home? What's the argument for doing this blanket, everyone has to come to work again?
Well, prior to them, so you didn't ask the question, why July 1st? And
You can answer that one too. That might have been a follow-up I might
but-
have written down here, you know.
Well, and people say, well, how come it isn't tomorrow? How come the executive order didn't take place during this pay period? And why July 1st? Because there was results of the COVID and some of the adjustments in the work environment had to be adjusted. There were some offices closed down. There was some furniture removed and moved to other places. And even the office environment still isn't there. So we had to give them time to reallocate, resources and adjust their quality of life in their work environment in order to do that, and that takes time. But two is to address your question is, the world has changed. People can work from home, sometimes better, and not all people are front facing to the public.
And you might lose talent.
All right.
You might lose good people
Well,
if you implement this.
It's called a job for a reason. So. And my issue with that is my observation, my experience, and part of even my campaign platform was my one-on-one interaction with state government and the failure for anybody to answer a phone, the failure for an individual who is looking for their unemployment benefits to get an answer to their question. You're left in the queue for 2 weeks, or you're on for 4 hours and you're not getting an answer. That's directly related to people not putting eyes on an individual and feeling their pain, right? It's easy to ignore somebody from your living room, right?
I know it.
Or the computer screen, right? Or your computer screen. And in my opinion, government service is a service. It's a service to the constituents. And that's where we've lost our way in that space. But part of that is just like with the ordinances and the regulation is we provide them a template and you tell me why you are going to perform better at home and how are we going to measure your work product? What is the accountability associated with that? And an example I'll give you is when I did a tour of Zappos. The people come and go their own free will. They're not punching a clock. And they can get on the phone or not and do their phone sales. And I asked them, I said, well, how do you manage it's all built in the system on the software on the phone, and it measures time. And so all we ask you is at the end of the week that you have that total time that you're required to be productive. Well, if you're gonna work from home, we're gonna have to measure your work product. Right, and we have to be able to have them identify how we're going to do that.
So you're open to some people doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's not across the board,
Okay.
and some of it does make sense. The state is a big organization, and it goes across the rural jurisdictions, and the offices are in disparate locations. And I'll use the Department of Wildlife as an example. 75% of your people in the Department of Wildlife don't go to an office. Their work is out in the field addressing wildlife issues. So that's not lost on me, but justify it to me.
So let's, you talk about the state being so big, let's talk about your budget for a little bit.
But I want to back up again.
Are you taking this state backwards?
Forget about it. Let's go.
That's what go ahead.
No, that one thing you said to me says, well, people are going to quit as a result of it, right? And I said, well, that's probably not my productive employee anyway.
So let's talk about the budget that you're proposing. That's really what every legislative session is about. Is what every governor,
right.
State of the state is about. $11 billion, by far the biggest budget in history.
2 years.
Yeah, but it's still by far the biggest budget in history. Are you sure you're a Republican?
Yeah, but don't get lost to how much is going to be in savings. So I think that's the important piece on that. It's not all spending. It's not the expansion of government. The executive order is trying to downsize government, but whether it's being utilized appropriately with accountability on the backside. And I think that's what's been missing. The key word I'm going to use tonight, and hopefully you remember, is accountability. And that's your money. And we got to have some accountability associated with it. So yeah, fortunately, the winds were in my favor. You're coming into my first year of my tenure, and I'm not in a crisis budget, but let's do something appropriate with it. And one of the key lines in that was no reoccurring projects. It's going to be, a lot of time, it's going to be a lot of one-time spend, like the fixing the state buildings for quality of life for the workers, building upon the rainy day accounts, the savings accounts to ensure that we, in case we are hit with some pandemic or this proverbial recession that we're in fear of here currently, that we are able to accommodate and to include the rainy day and savings fund for the education system. The cost that was associated with, kids going home and having laptops and access and information to continue with their education. All that's you have to have that sequestered and put away for rainy day. And have the rainy day fund be in an actual rainy day fund. So unfortunately in the pandemic, we depleted the rainy day fund in short order. The rainy day fund is intended to get you through a biennium. And it got us through 3 months. 4 months, right? And then what do? Then you have to start cutting all the rest of state services to survive, and then unfortunately your people suffer as a result.
So let me harken back to what you said. We were talking about mental health and how expensive it is. And I'm just using that as an example here, Governor. You want to put a $1.6 billion or so away. A lot of people say, you know what? If you look at the percentages and what it should be, $1 billion makes sense. Think about what you could do with that other $600 million in this state where stuff is so. What did you say?
You're right.
Okay, go on.
Okay, but I got an answer for that. I got an answer for that paradigm, and I tend to use this line a lot. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And you can easily throw all that money into the system, but you don't have the resources to manage it, you don't have the resources to deploy it, right? And you don't have the ability to have people consume it. And I think you're better off being slow and methodical, and in effect, that much change in the $1 billion number is way too fast. And hopefully we can manage it in that space. And an example I'll give you is the ARPA funds, the federal stimulus fund that's brought in to bolster and for retention and saving of local economies. During the IFC hearings, in the recent tranche of money that was allocated, there was quite often people that were talking about their investment justifications or their projects that they wanted to use ARPA money to fund. I'm sorry if I'm getting in the weeds here and getting a little wonky, but it's important for people to realize this. There was people that were up at the dais providing testimony on the project, and they said, well, we're going to give you $40 million. No, I know that said that, but I need a lot less than that because I don't have the resource, I don't have the people, and I can't implement it, right? And that's the problem if you end up taking all that money that you have readily available and throw it to the process. And part of that is my idea now is to even go back into those allocated monies in ARPA and see how I can reallocate that money. So we're going to have that resources still available. So slow and methodical.
So you might redirect some of that money is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about something that I think you're pretty proud of too in this budget. I said somewhat facetiously that you handed out candy in the state of the state to try to please everybody. And one of the things that you talked about was tax cuts. And I want to dig a little. Yeah. Let's see if they still clap after we dig into this, Governor. So one of the things you said is a tax cut is this idea of suspending the gas tax, and it's a $250 million item. But you really don't have any idea if that's a $250 million tax cut. You don't have any assurances that the price at the pump is going to change at all, that these corporations are going to say, oh yeah, we're going to pass that on. You promised hundreds of dollars in tax cuts for individual Nevadans. I mean, that seems like fuzzy math to me, Governor. So you really have no idea what that's going to do you?
Well, I have somewhat of an idea. I mean, obviously you can't predict anything into the future at 100%. But if you look at trends and averages across the board, and then you have at least 3 or more data sets, yeah, you can get in close proximization of that. Yeah, $250 million, maybe $210 million, or it may even be $270 million, okay? But it is a benefit to the consumer and the constituents that feel the pain the most. Some of us in the room, you probably don't feel that pain, but I do. I'm on a civil servant's pay, but and it's a.
Do you drive a gas guzzler too?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
sorry. But it does. It may make the difference in their life and the ability to put food on the table. And if I have the ability to do that, do it.
But that's money that could be used for the infrastructure of this state.
It's still going to be used for the infrastructure because we're going to backfill that $250 million with that $1.6 billion you described.
You have a lot of money to throw around, don't you?
But yeah, that's a concern, and that's an education piece. I started having some people panic because that fuel tax, funds infrastructure and different and FTEs, full-time employees, and things like that. And I said, no, we have that allocated, we have that budgeted, and we have it identified. We're going to backfill that from the savings to the constituents.
One of the other things you said in your State of the State, and I'm going to quote you here, in that same spirit, my budget lowers the modified business tax rate by 15% to 1.17%. You know what's coming here. You clearly implied.
I can't wait for it.
Yeah, you clearly implied to Nevadans who aren't, budget geeks, that you were doing this when it already had happened. It was done by law. That had to go down. That's not Joe Lombardo reducing the modified business tax. You know that.
I do know that.
But that's not what you implied in your speech, did you?
No, but I'm telling you, it's going to happen.
But what are you clapping for that for?
No, I think they know why they're clapping for that. And you know
but
what?
But it already happened.
Listen, my position is move forward, right? You never want to continue to look in the rearview mirror and make excuses. But if we look back a couple years prior to that when it was supposed to reduce again, on its own, it didn't because the government entered into the process and didn't lower it. I'm going to let it happen.
No sunsets.
No sunsets.
I got it. The other tax cut in your budget is the commerce tax, which had a $4 million threshold, and you're raising it up to $6 million. Do you know how many businesses that's going to affect?
1,100, 1,200.
1,100 or 1,200 businesses. Why do that? How is that going to help the average Nevadan?
Well, it's business too, right? It's not just the average Nevada, it's also businesses. Businesses bolster the economy across the board, and it's important that they're successful. And if we don't have to tax them as much as we have the ability to, there's no reason to. And we get back into what we're talking about with the savings and the ability to manage that over time. Not just for the biennium, into the future, right? Into the future, even, with the proverbial chance that there might be a recession or some new form of coronavirus or whatever it may be. That's the reason why. That's the reason why. We had an adjustment, inflation, COLA, cost of living, everything that goes, continues to march along without influence. We have to make adjustments for that. That's the way life is. You make adjustments. You make adjustments in your personal COLA. You make adjustments in the ability to afford what type of car you buy or whatever it may be. And there hasn't been adjustments since the infancy of that tax, and it's time that we made an adjustment to the benefit. Even though it's maybe 1,200 people, we can afford to do it.
That was, you mentioned Brian Sandoval earlier. That's his tax. You think it's a good tax?
Yeah, I believe so. There's a lot of consternation and a lot of pushback from, especially on my side of the fence, and people didn't understand it. But there was a $600 million delta in our ability to fund education, and that has filled that delta. And sometimes you gotta chew your lip and figure out whether this is the benefit of the people or not. Would I have done something different? Well, more than likely in that space, but it is what it is. And on the campaign trail, and I'll talk about the elephant in the room on this, a lot of my opponents said they would repeal it. And I said, well, but my question to that was, well, what do you fill the hole with? What do you fill the hole with? And that has been a huge influence on the education bottom line. So.
How How did you win that primary, given such responsible answers on questions like that? I still don't know that.
Well, there's a big deal. Well, you know, I mean, it is, and I've used this more than once. Political theater, you know, and hopefully you have the trust in the educated public and the voters that they understand the pragmatic answers to the problems, and you're just not making false inability to fill campaign promises that you're going to regret later, and then you're scrambling your whole career instead of doing good process. So
I do. You'll be happy to know I'm never going to get to all my questions, and this has been a great conversation so far, and we still have some time left. But I do want to talk about some other things you talked about in the state of the state. One is you talk about savings, $315 million for the Nevada Way Fund, which you described in case people, I can't believe anybody here didn't watch the state of the state, but just in case.
what was the snarky little response you had before I came out about that? What'd you call it, the independent fund?
I pivoted off. You have the Nevada Way, we have the Indy Way. You know what? And they can coexist.
They can.
So let me read this about this. Included in those savings is $315 million for the Nevada Way Fund, a new sub-account to be used for transformational economic development projects and critical infrastructure needs in areas such as emerging markets in the north and south ends of the Las Vegas Valley, as well as in other emerging markets in Nevada. Excuse me. So the serious question, two serious questions here, Governor. I hope you believe that I'm serious. Tell us what the Nevada Way really means. What does it really mean?
Never give up, never stop dreaming. but I know where the question is going. What it means is, you alluded to it in the first few words there, transformational. The way the government system is set up, especially when you're on a biennium system, is you sometimes lose opportunities. And you have you want to diversify the economy, you want to bolster the economy, and you have this significant industry that wants to put roots into your state boundaries, and they're looking for assistance from the state to make that happen, and that's pretty common practice for states to form that partnership, and so you can get that process going. But the way we are set up in Nevada, unless the IFC, the Interim Finance Committee, addresses that problem, you might lose opportunities. And quite often when you do government work too, you have, and the feds step in, they'll give you matching funds. If the state puts in 50% here, we'll put in 50% here. Well, we can't do that because we're in a biennium system, the IFC hasn't met, and it's just a cumbersome process, and we're missing opportunities out there to be successful. So, but to address that, because I know the Democrats' concern with that is well, you're just having your own personal slush fund. No, if you look at what I provided as justification, the executive branch gets involved in the process, okay? The way it is set now, it's just solely the legislative process. And I think it's important for the governor to have some autonomy and some ability to help the state out. And that's what I was elected for, and I don't want to miss those opportunities. But the oversight and the control of that and the protection of that, as I identified the leadership on both houses of the legislature to also be a part of the approval process.
Well, but you'd be the decisive vote on the approval, wouldn't you?
Well, not necessarily. It depends on how we codify it, whether it's the majority of the attendees or whether it's the majority of the total participation of the board.
But so to be fair, then what it is
I could actually be pushed back on it. So.
Well, yeah, but really it is a personal slush fund where you can give them what they think is a say, but they have to do basically in the end what you want to do with that money.
Nope. You're putting words in your mouth.
I'm good at that. I'm very good at that.
It's still a majority rule. I already said I'm one person, and they're more than one person.
So let me ask you one other fiscal question before we move on to education, which I know is the most important issue to you and to a lot of people in this room. I was kind of surprised. I saw this interview that you did with the RJ's Jessica Hill, and you said that you do not favor raising the debt limit, which seemed like an odd thing to say, Governor. I mean, it's not really your decision anyhow, but I mean, you would put the full faith and credit of the United States of America at risk. You would risk jobs here in Nevada because you don't think they should raise the debt limit at a federal level?
No. When you ask a very far-reaching question like that, where I actually don't even have any authority on, it is in the federal space. But my outside looking into that particular paradigm is wasteful spending and not identifying ways to cut back to ensure that you can.
But that's the future. This is about paying the bills for the bills that we've already accrued.
Well, no, there's a point, at some point, you got to stop making excuses and open your eyes to the issue. And what are we in, $31 trillion debt nationally, and how do we recover from that? And it's because we keep raising the debt ceiling and we're not looking internally and looking backwards and see how we can make cuts to balance the budget. So, and you know what? It was asked of my opinion. That's my opinion. In reality, you know they're going to raise it. You know they're going to raise it, right?
But shouldn't they, though, to make sure we pay
yeah,
our bills?
I mean, ensure that we're getting the services they need. But yeah. I want it on the record. I want it on the record. I don't appreciate your wasteful spending. So.
All right. So let's talk about the education proposals that you have, and you're pouring $2 billion into the education system in this state, which is unprecedented. It's a fantastic amount of money. I think you're increasing the per pupil student spending by $2,000 or so per spending. So some of your friends on the right might say, what are you doing? This system has not been working here. You're pouring $2 billion into a failed system. Why are you doing that? What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's not a short answer. It's a very complicated answer, but there is an answer. If you look at the education system, it's in my opinion, you could probably say 10-pronged system, but more importantly, I think it's more of a 3-pronged system. You have your educators, your teachers, and your wraparound services that breed success into the thing. You have your pupils. And what their resources could be brought to bear to help them become educated, which is the pupil-centered funding formula, and how you divvy up those resources. And then you have, I don't really want to put infrastructure, you know what, you got to have infrastructure, because one of the issues that we experience in the education, especially in the state of Nevada, is your teacher per student ratio. We're one of the lowest in the nation in overcrowding the schools, and that becomes infrastructure, right? But then part of that, if you build more schools and you spread it out, you got to have teachers in the pipeline to occupy that occupancy. So it's a circular issue, and people say, well, you're just throwing more money at a failed system. No, you need money for all those different issues associated with the system. But hold on. But I think it's important for people to hear this. People say, well, it's just teacher pay. It's just for the union. It's just teacher pay. Yeah, that is part of it, right? They deserve a quality of life and a good living, right? But that's only part of it. That's only part of it. The other is the infrastructure to put the kids in because of student ratios. The other one is ensure that you have the right curriculum. The other one is you have a quality seat for that student with the resources that come along with it. But the other part on that is options. And we're going to talk about that. I'm sure you're going to talk about school choice, right?
Yeah.
So it is throwing money into the system, but it's building the system. And the key component on this, outside of that, and I'm sure you're going to mention it, is I mentioned accountability all along the way. And that's where I think we have failed.
Well, but you do mention accountability, and to your credit, by the way, Governor, to hear a Republican governor start out his tenure by just saying what every Democratic governor said, which is education here is underfunded, right? You acknowledge that it's underfunded. You said that in the State of the State, but you say there needs to be accountability, which has always been, and it's amazing that legislators can't even talk about this with each other. They go into their corners, more money, accountability, and they can never come to the table. But even your accountability that you talked about in the State of the State, which I acknowledge they're generally vague, you don't have any specifics in there, what you're going to do if certain things don't happen. I mean, where's the hammer?
Yeah, you're right. So I think it was probably Sisolak. I'm not sure, and I'm sure you can quote me on it. There was accountability measures put into the system on teacher-student ratio, right? And maybe it was even before Sandoval, I'm not sure. But this is what's going to happen. There's going to be accountability. It wasn't defined if you didn't meet that ratio. And I said, well, how can you meet the ratio if the person that you're asking to address that ratio can't build a school, right? And then if you do build a school to adjust for that ratio, do you have a teacher to put into it to lower the ratio? So it's the proverbial dog chasing its tail. And so to answer your question about accountability, you got to put those measurement sticks in there. And so I got asked that question when we were over here prior to the event tonight. Well, what does that look like to you? So there was a commission put together under Sisolak to figure out the funding formula. Okay, and they come back with the recommendations, and the recommendations was $2 billion to fix the school system, and so they gave me a briefing on that, and then but it sunsetted. The commission sunsetted, and I said, well, we need to reinstitute the sunset and continue the commission so we could figure out those measurement matrices for the accountability, and what is that specifically, and so that's the plan. That's the plan going forward.
And it makes sense to have.
And to answer the rest of your question, well, what are you going to do if they don't meet it, right? Well, then there's people that need to be replaced.
Well, did you hire these people who were yelling? No. But seriously, Governor, here's the difficulty with that, and it makes sense that if you're going to have more spending. Listen, I'm giving you the more spending, but we need to have some kind of accountability for the spending. But you also want to be careful that whatever the accountability is, whatever hammer you bring, doesn't hurt the kids, right?
Absolutely.
Because these kids are in public school. I have an 11-year-old stepdaughter who's sitting right there, was in public school, and I know something about it. And, more money would be nice and more accountability would be nice, but this is a difficult needle to thread, and you can't seem to get Democratic and Republican legislators to ever talk like in the same language.
Well, you're right. So we got the Republican side handled, okay?
You do?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, that's
me.
me.
Have you met some of the Republican legislators? No, never mind.
I'm talking about me, all right?
Okay, all right.
Well, what I'm talking about, and everybody alluded to it when you talked about the state of the state, there is candy in there for the Democrats, and unfortunately they were sitting on their hands when it was presented.
You're really mad that they didn't clap it, aren't you?
No, I'm kidding. No.
You got plenty of it tonight.
Yeah. But the that requires a discussion, and so we are meeting some of their needs, we're meeting some of our needs, and hopefully we can come together in a consensus on that. And if it's not, there's an election in 4 years, right?
That seems like a long time away, doesn't it?
So, right. But I anticipate I'll be here about 8 years.
8 years?
Yeah.
You're announcing for re-election? You sure you're going to like the job enough?
Well, I love it so far.
Okay, all right. It's early.
I love it so far.
Wait until February 6th. Now, let's talk. We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to get to a couple other things, including what you alluded to, which is school choice, which you talked about during the campaign, and the governor argued with you about that. There were a lot of people upset about it. They're even more upset now that you talked about school choice in your state of the state. But there are people, again, on the right who say, we finally got this Republican in here, and what is he doing? He's doing half measures. The core of school choice in this state, when it was passed and upheld by the Supreme Court, Governor, was education savings accounts. Most expansive program in the country. On Joe Lombardo's campaign website, he said he's going to invest an education savings account. And yet, that's not what you said in your State of the State. What are you afraid of?
What are you leaving out of that narrative?
I think my narrative was complete, sir.
It was repealed by the Democrats.
But all you had to do is propose it again, right?
Well, and it's not as simple as that when it made it to the courts, right? So, yeah, you can propose it, but look, we need to do something in short order versus,
So you're giving up on education savings accounts?
No, I haven't given up on it at all. But I need to do something now. We have to fix something now. And we got to start moving forward now. And part of that is, education savings accounts. So you could have school choice, right? But if you don't have the ability to have that money follow that kid to go wherever they want, it doesn't make sense. There's only so many. If you have a magnet school and the kid wants to go to magnet school, well, there's only a limited number of seats, right? And you're not expanding on that opportunity. So right now, in short order, the answer to that question is opportunity scholarships. And you'll have the people on the right says, well, you didn't fund it right. Well, we doubled the request for opportunity scholarships from 25 million to 50 million, okay? But part of that, the requirement to receive an opportunity scholarship is funding. So, and they base it off a family of four and the poverty level, which is probably 28,000 in today's dollars. And you qualify plus 300% of that. So right now it's 50-something thousand. If your family, they'll give you a scholarship if you make less than this, all right? But the proposal, moving forward with one of my bills into this school choice answer is to increase that threshold to 500%. So
So you bring in more people that bring a lot more
So you bring
kids.
more people into it. So, there's a person out there that says, well, I should have put $1 billion into opportunity scholarships. Well, you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time, and you don't have the people to inject into $1 billion. You don't
Maybe
have
you're
the
just not
opportunity.
hungry enough.
Well,
Maybe
no,
you're just not hungry
everything's tight. You got to be methodical about change and figure out the unintended consequences along the way. And so we'll increase that to 500. So that'll put you in, the 90 to 150,000 threshold. Okay, so imagine how many more people are going to be included into that system, and that's built in every biennium. So we're looking at 0.5% per annually, and then eventually we'll cap it out at 5%. And could you imagine how many people that's going to affect? So that's the early throes of school choice. And then we can start talking about, education savings accounts and all that as we move forward, okay? And then, but the other part on that, I'm going to build off the school choice is, I said I'm going to put an office of school choice into the Department of Education. And what does that mean? It's just narrative. That's just talk. It doesn't really mean anything. You got to have some teeth into it. Well, the teeth is it's advocacy, first time ever, advocacy and information. You're going to put all those different options that is at a parent's reach and grasp, and give them the information what their options are. And that's never done before. Now it's just ad hoc, and you rely on special interests to help you in that space. And how I can compare it is the Office of New Americans, right? Advocacy and information. Advocacy and information to include management of the charter authority. So currently in the charter schools, the charter authority can approve a charter school, all right, or in the public school space, right? And it's very limiting. I want to include that into the city and the counties and have them have the ability to include themselves in the charter school process.
How so?
By giving them the authority. If they want to stand up within their own government and their pay to set it up, they can be part of that process.
By creating their own schools.
Yeah. And a good thing when we talk back to some of the key problems in education is ratios, right? Teacher and students. If you don't have the curtilage, or not the curtilage, but the edifice in order to occupy those students, you could throw a charter school in there and help with that ratio. And that could be identified by the city and the county, who has more information than I do at the state level, right? And then the other piece on this is the infrastructure fund can be restructured via ARPA funds to help in that build out. So what the rurals are currently experiencing is they don't have buildings for schools. They're outgrowing their schools because the pupil-centered funding formula neglects them in some aspects, you can give those low-interest loans out of the infrastructure bank to address that particular issue.
So now you're making
cool, right? That's cool, right?
So you're making it clear tonight with what you've said. You've talked in more detail here that there really is an expansion of school choice.
There's an expansion.
Because it looked from what you said, Governor. Let me just finish with all due respect. What you said in the state didn't look like any expansion. There's already charters and magnets and the rest of it. But if you're changing that threshold, that's clearly an expansion. But still, we had the most expansive school choice program in the country when Brian Sandoval proposed it. Why wouldn't you just go and say, we're going to do this again, exactly what Brian Sandoval did, who apparently has a bigger appetite than you and can eat the whole elephant? Why not do that?
Because of the situation I've been put in with the legislature.
There's no chance of getting it on. So
I got to be pragmatic about it. I got to have more discussion. I have to have more support going forward.
So it's political reality, essentially, is what you're saying.
Well, sometimes it is, but I don't want it to be lost on people because they're frustrated that we didn't get the expansion on school choice that we asked, we're expecting. But we are. We have a design in place to get us there in the short order, and then we'll look at bigger bites as we move forward.
That's very candid of you, and I appreciate it. I guess what I'm wondering is, if at all you're concerned that what some would argue about school choice, that using public dollars for private schools is essentially going to lead to the gutting and maybe the dismantling of the public education system as we know it. Are you concerned about that?
No, I don't agree with that. And just like I said before, when you make decisions, especially at this breadth and this size and magnitude, is you have to rely on if other people have done it. You don't ever want to be the beta agency in something of this decision. And there's been proven success across the board, no matter where you look.
So go ahead. So, your wife really loves you, by the way. I gotta tell you, she does. We got about 10 or 15 minutes left, and I'm sure you're thrilled to hear that.
No, I'm enjoying myself.
It's been a great conversation, right?
You know, and to be frank with you, this is an opportunity to educate the masses, right? And the problem is a lot of times we're sequestered in our own bubbles, and we receive information from disparate, social media, whatever it may be. This gives the opportunity to spread that word than me meeting people individually. So I appreciate you for that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. That really is why we do these kinds of conversations, and I appreciate again that you took the time. I've heard from a lot of people, and you probably have as well. Why didn't the governor talk about the housing crisis in this state, in his state of the state? There's not an affordable housing crisis in this state. There's not a problem with the eviction process as it exists in this state. And you probably know something about this from your law enforcement background. You didn't really focus on that at all in your speech. Why not?
Well, I did mention it, and that was under the lands
right.
portion.
But that's not going to solve the problem.
A lot of times your big problems have more than one solution, or it's a combination of a lot of solutions. Well, let's talk about the land issue, and that one is the predictable release of federal lands. Unfortunately, in the state of Nevada, we're encumbered by the federal land process. The majority of our land, available land, has to be not given to us at a very expensive rate by the federal government, and so that's going to be that needs to be a robust discussion. Okay, so in order that we have a predictable, so developers can predict their bottom lines and make adjustments to address that, and it has to be at a reasonable price. I proposed this idea during the campaign, and I think it's a very viable idea, but the logjam at the federal government, I don't know if it'll ever get done, but maybe with Amodei and his new committee assignments, he maybe can help us in that. It's very expensive to purchase federal land and then try to put an affordable house on it, right? But why not defer the cost of that on the front end until the development is developed? and then start making payments to the federal government at that point. And so you save all that money on the front end. The developer can build it affordably, right? They can build it affordably, and because the government is not in the profit business. And so that's one solution, that space.
But you need the federal government's help in doing that. You can do some things on your own.
But even the state has a substantial amount of encumbered land that if you look at, if you have some vision associated, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road, they're never going to occupy it. They're never going to utilize it. But why not put that into the public or the affordable housing space, at the cost of $1 an acre, whatever it may be, because the state's not in the profit business. So there's some available land in that space. And then what you can get involved in the infrastructure bank. You can reallocate, you can help the developers with loans via the infrastructure bank at very low interest, right? So there's a lot of different solutions to address that. And then we talk about the labor issues that I mentioned on the campaign trail. You put a PLA on top of a project labor agreement on top of the agreement, that increases the cost. So you have a 5,000 house rooftop vision, and that pushes it down to a 2,500 rooftop vision in order for the numbers to match and for it to be affordable for the eventual person that occupies that space. So it's a 3-pronged solution, it's a 4-pronged solution, it's a 5-pronged solution that is the solution to that problem.
Do you think that the pandemic exposed how vulnerable tenants are to landlords, considering that the eviction process that's used here, the so-called summary eviction process, is really slanted against the tenants?
I wouldn't say that in totality. I would say that in some measurement, but you also, the solutions that they brought forward where you apply to the judge and everything else, that's almost been become a crutch versus a solution, because it's bogged down in the system. And
so it doesn't need to be reformed at all, Governor?
Well, I think it needs to be objectively reformed with full disclosure on both sides.
So I want to dive into one more topic, ask a few political questions, and then you can go out to dinner and talk about what a great guy I am, okay? And that is this election reform package.
I'm excited to talk about that.
You knew I was going to bring that up,
yeah,
right?
I knew it.
I know. So you essentially are making the case that you need to do something as governor to restore faith in the election process. Despite your admirers who just clapped for that.
I thought it was about 75% of the room.
Yeah. I'd say that's about right. There is no problem with confidence in polls, except that caused by Republicans who told their voters that the election was stolen in 2020 and that you shouldn't trust a process in Nevada that has been judged by independent arbiters as one of the cleanest, most transparent, and fraud-free elections. Listen, you have been, you and I are going to talk about this. We've talked about it before. So why a solution in search of a problem, Governor?
Well, I don't agree with that in totality. So there's more than just one problem when we talk about election reform. And I allude to those in the state of the state, and I'm happy to walk through them with you here. And I think Cisco, are you still here? I want you to listen here, Cisco. So let's talk about universal mail. It was a product on the back end of COVID, and understandably because there was a fear that people didn't have the ability to go out and vote, right? But we know, and I guarantee you'll agree, the voter rolls are not clean. The voter rolls are not clean. you could ask the person next to you that they're aware of somebody that moved out of the house 2 years ago and they're still getting their ballots, and that ballot is available for anybody to grab and take the chance of filling it out and then hopefully get past the signature verification process or anything else that we have put in place, right? It's a law of percentages, and that's what I'm talking about. Yes, when you measure it, there isn't law for because we put stopgaps in it, signature verifications and other processes, but there's still that perception of failure, and there still is some failure. It's in any process in the system. It could be 1%, 2%, or 3%. All right, but 3% is a big number.
Okay. We're going to be late for dinner now that you did this. No. Here's the story, though. The voter rolls do need to be cleaned up. You were right. I was going to agree with you on that. What I don't agree with is that if you send a ballot, first of all, people loved the last 2 cycles voting by mail. You know that. People responded well to it. A huge percentage. Let me just finish, and then you can tell me that I'm wrong. It's a huge percentage of people thought that voting by mail. Other states have done it. They've liked the convenience of it. Yes, some mail ballots are going to be sent to people who don't exist in this state anymore, who are not, shouldn't be on the rolls or whatever. But they're not voting, Governor. There's no fraud coming from that.
Oh, see, that's where you got your head in the sand, okay? And I've seen it, you've seen it, and you have to admit you've seen it. You go by an apartment complex, you got a mailbox there, and you got 50 ballots sitting in there because the mailman didn't feel the need to distribute, or whatever the reason may be. And you have an unregistered ballot harvester that picks those up and says, I'm going to take care of these, and right, wrong, or different, opens the ballots and fills them out, and hopefully
Do you think that happened? Do you think there was a lot of fraud?
I think there's a percentage. I think there's a percentage that gets through. Not a lot, but I think there's a percentage. But why not remove that percentage? Why not remove that percentage?
You're making it more difficult for people to vote then, aren't you?
No. How is that? How is it making it more difficult?
Because you're forcing people to go on a website and opt in or opt out of something, as opposed to just, look, I got my ballot in the mail. This is great. Now I can vote by mail.
Are you trying to say that's very difficult?
I didn't say that. I'm asking the questions.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting. Okay, let's because that's just one aspect of it.
But prior to COVID, we had targeted mail. Was it a problem? It wasn't a problem until we believed after with COVID.
We don't know that it's a problem at all. You're saying it's a problem.
Yeah, I am saying it's a problem. Okay.
So you also talked about ballot harvesting, or ballot collection, whatever you want, and it used to be regulated more stringently in this state. They expanded that as well during the pandemic. Do you think that there is fraud occurring? Do you think that?
I think the people that ballot harvest, which just a few years ago, people were getting arrested for it. But if you have the appropriate people doing it, I think both sides could benefit from the process. But I think it needs to be controlled. If it's outside of a family member or somebody else that's designated as your representative, I think that those people need to be registered, and it needs to be a controlled process.
You also do support voter ID.
Yes.
Which again is a controversial proposal. You don't think it should be controversial, though, even though it might be harder for some people than it would be for others?
What's the controversy?
Well, the controversy is that some people don't want to get an ID like that, and that the process works fine the way it is.
But you're talking, I'd like to find somebody that doesn't want to get an ID that they utilize in their daily lives. So there's a. I'm not very familiar with, and this might be my ignorance. I'm not very familiar with a significant portion of the population that's able to vote that isn't in possession of an ID. So.
I want to wrap this up because we're getting close to time. The Democrats have already said this is a non-starter.
Yeah, they did.
You've heard that, and you expect. Why
But
is
here's one thing, everything's in the spirit of compromise. If we can do one or two or a couple items on this, I'm all for it. But I don't want a loggerhead on this, because if you look at it, it's a majority positive issue. If you look at the polls associated with voter integrity, the majority of people says there needs to be change. And so if we can't get some process in this, yes, I'll ask for it to go to a vote of the people.
You said that, and that's...
I'll ask it to go to a vote of the people. Well, here's one thing, just at top line, I feel that they're going to be amenable to is this process of continuing to send in mail ballots after the day of voting. Why can't we fix that on the front end? And then you can't tell me that's denying people the ability to vote when they had 10 days prior with the possession of their mail ballot to do that.
There's already a bill in, I think you may have seen it, to extend it back from 4 to 7 days. They had actually cut it back from 7 to 4 days. And I think that's a reasonable proposal. It's embarrassing for Nevada nationally, and it contributes to the perception that something funny is going on, right? Because candidates who are ahead on election night end up losing, or vice versa. But let me just wrap this part of the discussion. It's got a couple more questions, and we'll close it up. Governor, you have the loudest voice in the state now. I know you take that with all serious. When you speak, it's much different than whether it's the speaker or any other legislator speak. You've got to be concerned. I think it's one of the biggest problems in this country with people not having faith in the outcomes of elections. You have to be really careful with the rhetoric you use when you're advocating for what may be some really good reforms here.
You're
and
right.
So, do you think about that at all? Because
Yes,
it's a great
I do.
responsibility.
You do that. And quite often during the campaign, they were asking about Joe Biden if he's duly elected, and I said yes.
Yep.
I said yes, but why not do whatever we can to move the process forward to even the perception of fraud? So.
You want as many people to vote as possibly can, right? You want.
Yes,
big
absolutely,
turnout.
absolutely. It's a sacred right, and I think everybody should have the ability to do it.
So, all right. So, Mr. Secretary of State, you're on the same page. Nothing to worry about. So let me just ask you a few. We've spent an hour and a half now talking about policy, and I really appreciate it. It's been a great discussion. Just want to ask you just a few political questions to close this out. And some of them you'll see coming a mile away, but I do want to let's have a serious conversation about this too. I've been covering politics in this state a long time, as you know. I have never seen a governor, after he was elected, collect $2 million. Isn't that a bit unseemly? Look at their applauding. A lot of them gave you some of it. Isn't that a bit unseemly? What was the pitch? You gave to Sisolak, you better give the same to me. I mean, what was it? And isn't that a kind of an unseemly part of this whole process?
Well, I talked about it in the beginning, or not in the beginning, a while back in this discussion. Money in politics is unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And I wish, they always say candidates matter, right? And hopefully it's not obscured by the ability to raise money. But because of the money, you have to spend money to push back on negative rhetoric, or you sell your story or your platform. But if we were all capped at the same ability in that process, hopefully your resume would speak for you and your history.
But this is after the election.
Right,
You're elected.
Right.
What are you doing that for now?
Huh?
What do you need $2 million after the election?
Because we're still caught in that bad process, and the ability to continue to sell your story along the way.
So what are you going to spend that money on?
Nothing at this point. But to answer your question is, how did this happen? Did I go out and strong arm people and I'm the governor now? No, we know. I know that that's not the case, and I would never do that. But what it is people, they want to ensure that they support the right person, and hopefully that will help them be successful.
For the record, you used the word strong arm. I did not use the word.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
Anyhow, part of that unprecedented Joe Lombardo fundraising machine is that one man, Robert Bigelow, funneled tens of millions of dollars through various methods to your campaign. So I'll just ask the question so we can get it off the table. What does he want for that investment?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. And I heard a little jeer out there, and I'm telling you right now, he wants nothing. He wants nothing. He wanted the conservative side of the House to be successful in Nevada politics, and he. And just to make sure we have some transparency on this, I seen different news media say that he donated to the tune of $30 million to Mike campaign. That's absolutely incorrect.
Well, they're including PACs and how much he gave to the
but he
the
gave
Republican
to other
Governors
people,
Association, and it was all funneled back to help you.
Yeah. But if you look at it, no, not all of it. No, not all of it. You almost got that by me. But there was a pretty comprehensive graph that came out here recently. I don't remember what the periodical was, but Mr. Sisolak still was double digits ahead of me in fundraising. So, and the voters spoke. They liked the story I had. They liked what I stood for, and my history and my background and what my vision was, and here I am today. And so we're gonna be good.
Landslide Lombardo.
You know what? I got to give you kudos, though, John. He's right. He's been involved in politics for several decades. He's much older man than me.
It's true. It's true as well.
But he seems to. I don't know what it is. I don't know who his soothsayer is or whatever. But he seems to predict those percentages right at the last day. So, good job to you on that.
Yeah. Finally, I'm going to ask you this question, and I hope I never have to bring up this subject with you again, and I think you feel the same way. And I've been meaning to ask you about it since the campaign.
What kind of bourbon I like?
You like bourbon, not scotch?
No, I like scotch.
Okay, that's what I was hoping, yeah. In fact, it's funny. This is a true story. It seems like forever ago that you called me up and said, let's go for a drink at Vintner Grill. You remember this, right? We sat at the bar drinking scotch, and that's when you told me you were serious about running for governor.
Right.
Remember that?
And I remember you tried to talk me out of it.
I just remember you told me who your campaign team was, and I said, really? You can't do better? I'm kidding, Ryan, I'm kidding. So the question is, of course, you and I sat together on a stage with your opponent, and I asked you if Donald Trump was a great president. You said he was a sound president. Then that evening, your campaign corrected you and said he was a great president. And then you were up on stage with him and you said, he's the greatest president. Now, I don't know you super well, but you and I have known each other over the years, and you've always been a straight shooter. Did that feel like, did you need to take a shower after that, Governor?
No, absolutely not. I'm a man of my word, and I believe in what I say. And if I told you, I misspoke, I would tell you that. And you know what? And I said it on the stage with you, and I don't want to get boil it down to a word here or there. But I believe a lot of his policies he brought forward were successful and helped the state or the country move forward. Now, all the other ancillary, and I think to be successful, you have to have the whole package. And there were some ancillary things, when we get into social media and comments made and other things that, we're not in agreement with. And I think it's important that you take an objective look at who you're supporting. And you're never, ever, ever, even my wife doesn't think 100% of me. All right, and
you want to come up and tell me some things? No, never much.
And that's politics. There's 1,000 spokes in the wheel in politics and success, doing what you're running for, and you're never going to have 100% in that space.
You think he's the greatest president of all time?
Of all time?
Of all time. That's what you said.
Did I say that?
Yes, up on stage with him. I mean, that was all theater, right? You're the one who loves political theater. That's what that was, right?
I love political theater.
So are you supporting Donald Trump for president in 2024?
I'm worried about Joe Lombardo being the governor of the state of Nevada.
He's good. Governor, I want to say again, and I'm sincere in this, and I really appreciate your taking an hour and a half plus of your time to come and discuss important issues. We at the Indy really want to do more of these events not just with you, but with legislators and with community leaders, because you're right. People just, they get the sound bites, but they don't have a chance to talk in depth. And you know what? I don't care if you're a Democrat in this room or a Republican. We should all want you to be successful. We should want the state
God, I'm
to
so
be
glad
successful.
to hear you say that. I'm so glad to hear you say that.
So I want to close out by saying good luck in the session. I don't think you have any idea what you're in for, but good luck.
You got to remember, my whole life has been based on managing crisis.
That's right.
So,
Governor, thanks.
Thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you. So thank you. Thank you.